Hello, good evening, and let me thank all of you who have joined us, the members of the Parliamentary Reform Commission. With me are commissioners chaired by Sir Richard Cheltenham, Deputy Chair Sir Roy Trotman, and to my far right we have Commissioners Dr. Richard Ishmael, Senator Elizabeth Thompson, and entering is Commissioner Corey Beckles, and to my left, Commissioner Dr. William Chandler. And as you know, the Commission has been consulting across the country, and this is one of the two final public meetings, the other one being held with the Barbados Labour Party tomorrow night. And with those few words, I would invite the chairman, Sir Richard, to make some opening comments.
Thank you. I want to begin, fellow commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, by thanking the General Secretary and the Executive of the Democratic Labour Party for agreeing to meet with the Parliamentary Reform Commission and for their warm welcome as we were coming in this evening. I must quickly add that you may be surprised to know that it is not the first time that I'm here. Yes, I said I must first add that it is not the first time that I have been here at the Democratic Labour Party headquarters. It was Mr. Astor Watts of blessed memory who received me and gave me the benefit of his rich experience and deep knowledge of the DLP as I was doing a biographical piece on one of your seniors, work for the forthcoming Dictionary of Barbadian Personalities being produced by Sir Woodville Marshall. I chatted with Sir Woodville earlier today, and he told me that he's still hoping that he can get to the press before the year is ended. I want to acknowledge the presence of my fellow commissioners. We have, of course, my deputy, Sir Roy Trotman. We have to my right Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson. We have Ms. Maxine McLean, Dr. Richard Ishmael, Dr. William Chandler, and Mr. Corey Beckles. I want to acknowledge the presence of former Minister and Leader of Government Business, John Boyce, and your General Secretary, or President, sorry, Mr. Yearwood, Ronnie Yearwood, and Steve Blackett, whom I've known for many, many years, working as he did with an old friend of mine, Mr. Herbie Yearwood. I want to begin by reminding the public of the history of the Parliamentary Reform Commission and say something about its work to date. The Commission was established on May 8th this year. Generally speaking, we have been looking at our current parliamentary system to see what reforms need to be implemented in the structure and function of Parliament. And in discharging our mandate, we have had a number of public meetings, including with the diaspora. We have received a number of written submissions, which we are carefully reviewing. And we have also benefited from the views of various experts. A lot of Barbadians are concerned to know why we are undertaking parliamentary reform at this time. Some of us will remember when Barbados became independent in November of 1966. I was still a student in Canada at McGill University in Montreal. It was a proud moment for our country's history and development. And according to Prime Minister Errol Barr, we were determined not to be caught loitering on colonial premises after closing time. He thought that with the movement to independence in the British colonial world, we in Barbados were determined not to be caught loitering. But as proud as we were in that moment, there were still some colonial linkages which persisted. Notwithstanding the independence, for example, we retain a monarchy. So while Barbados severed its ties to the British government, we retained the British sovereign as our head of state. That explains why our governors general in Barbados were appointed by the Queen as our local representative, though always, I must add, on the advice of the local government. But that is not the only colonial linkage which persisted. Our ambassadors, for example, had to be approved by the Queen. I should add that there is no case on record where she objected, but it did delay the process, and sometimes the appointment could take upwards of 3 months, just because the names had to pass through the palace. On top of that, certain office holders, including judges and parliamentarians, had to take an oath of allegiance not to our country, Barbados, but to the Crown. In terms of Parliament, previously, when the Governors General assented to legislation passed by both houses, he or she did so in their capacity as the Queen's representative. Now, with our Republican status, it is done on behalf of our citizens. Essentially, a republic is a country without a monarch. If you gave that as a brief definition, you will get high marks. A republic is a country without a monarch. That is the simple definition. And the step we took in November 2021 was to change our system of government from a constitutional monarchy to a parliamentary republic. It was the final step in the decolonization process and in asserting our nationhood. Our new Republican status presents us with the perfect moment in our development to review what has gone before in terms of our Parliament and decide what reforms need to be implemented now to make our Parliament more consistent with our Republican status. We have retained the Westminster style of government with 2 houses of Parliament, the House of Assembly and the Senate, and a ceremonial head of state. Should that structure continue? That's one of the many questions we have to ask. Should that structure continue? Another issue resulting from our terms of reference is how best to make our Parliament more inclusive. In terms of representativeness as well, we have also to look at the range of interests represented by independent senators in the upper house. At present, the President may appoint persons who represent religious, economic, or social interests. The question we have to ask is, should those categories be widened to include the elderly, the youth, the disabled, the LGBT community, small business, while still retaining the 3 interests which are represented today: social, economic, and religious. One of the big issues is ethics, transparency, and accountability. All over the world, citizens are rightly calling on their representatives to be more accountable and transparent in the discharge of their public duties. The public has reposed their confidence in their parliamentarians, and they should not abuse it in any way. Recently, the Integrity in Public Life Bill was passed. But we must also look at a code of ethics for parliamentarians generally, as well as the function of the Public Accounts Committee. That committee has an important supervisory role with respect to public spending. But the leader of the opposition is the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. And at present, there is no leader of the opposition, and so there is no chairman. The committee is not able to meet. And the question which arises is whether non-parliamentarians should not be on the Public Account Committee as well as parliamentarians, and whether we should not always have a deputy chairman so that if for any reason the chairman is not present or cannot be present, the committee could still get ahead with its work. Consulting with our established political parties was always going to be an important aspect of the Commission's public discussions. Both the BLP and the DLP have consistently, since 1955, and I think my memory serves me right, the DLP was founded. Ever since then, these two parties provided Barbados, along with the Barbados National Party, and subsequently for a while the motley group, with the people who made up our parliament. The political landscape has changed, but the time has come to recognize political parties and arrive at a working definition of a political party. And in that respect, the input of the BLP, whom we'll be consulting with tomorrow, and the DLP will be invaluable. We must not shy away either from seeking your input in addressing the unprecedented situation of having no parliamentary opposition. I've already noted that the lack of a parliamentary opposition has hindered the functioning of the Public Accounts Committee. Some are suggesting we adopt Sir Henry Ford's 1998 recommendation contained in the report of the Constitution Review Commission, which he headed, to give the opposition at all times 6 Senate seats. Sir Henry had recommended that. Will that address the problem obstructing the functioning of the Public Accounts Committee and the other problem of the opposition having no seats in the last 2 elections? We also need to hear from you whether the time has come to have an uneven number of seats in the House Assembly. In our 2013 general election, the results were 14-16. And at one point during the night, there was a concern that we could have had a tie and could easily have resulted in deadlock at the polls. But with an even number of parliamentary seats, we run the risk that there could be an election outcome which results in a tie. And at that point, we are faced with a major constitutional crisis. We need to avoid that. And so we need to have an uneven number of seats. We have also retained the first-past-the-post electoral system, where the political party which receives the most votes wins. In examining our system, some voices are calling, given the results in the last 2 elections, for proportional representation. Is that the answer to the recent result at the polls? That is an important question we will ask ourselves, and on which we would need to hear the input of the opposition. I speak for the Commission when I say we are anxious to hear the views of the Democratic Labour Party, informed by long practical experience on these and any other issues which they wish to raise. I pause to note that the Commission's mandate to review our parliamentary institutions has been triggered by a move to republicanism, However, that is not to say that our old system did not work well. Though politics is necessarily competitive and at sometimes even aggressive, since 1966 our Parliament has benefited from a spirit of cooperation between the major political parties and between the leaders themselves. Not many people were often present when Prime Minister Barr will signal Tom, let's meet behind the Speaker's chair. And in talking one to another, each rested his hand genuinely on the other's shoulder. And they chatted with deep respect for one another. And as two outstanding fellow Barbadians. And sometimes the man in the street believes that the politicians are enemies. That is not. In my 25 years, 23 in the House before I resigned from that and 2 in the Senate, that I have seen them at work. So as I said, though politics necessarily politics are competitive and aggressive, since 1966 our Parliament has benefited from a spirit of cooperation between the major political parties and between the leaders themselves. To me, this is emblematic of Barbadians' pragmatism and commitment to democracy. Unlike other small and even larger societies, we have striven for harmony in the interests of good governance. And I hope that the Commission's work and eventual recommendations will not only highlight that history, but ensure its continuation into the long future. And with those remarks, we can get on with our business at hand this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And in terms of process, let me just remind you that this is a public session. It is being streamed, and as have been the other sessions, and therefore you will probably see some of us on our phones constantly, and that is part of our interaction with our online viewers who are sending comments. So there's a collating of those comments or questions to be posed later. And before I go to President Dr. Ronnie Yearwood, I just want to quickly, very quickly sum up much of what you heard. And in his opening comments, Chairman of the Commission would have highlighted the terms of reference of the Commission. He's identified some of the key issues which have emerged from our several meetings, consultations, and submissions. This is part of that process. Basically, we want to hear the views of Barbadians across the country and across the diaspora, as you heard. So what I will do now as person moderating or chairing this session is to first invite President Dr. Ronnie Yearwood to share his thoughts, and as we will then open to hear your various contributions, and I will seek to manage that process to ensure that we can get the maximum input. In the process of hearing your contributions, there may be questions posed by some of my colleagues here at the head table, or any or all of my colleagues, for elaboration, or to hear your thoughts on something which you might have touched on or not touched on. So having said that, now let me invite Dr. Yearwood. The mic is yours.
Good night to the commissioners. Good night to my Democratic Labour Party family, to those viewing online. I want to welcome you all to the Democratic Labour Party. I'm so pleased that you're here to share this afternoon with us and to hear the views of our membership, and obviously a representative of our fellow Barbadians, and that the party has this opportunity, as we did with the Constitutional Reform Commission, to interact with you and to share our views. What I would want to say is to just preface perhaps what Sir Richard just said in terms of the spirit of cooperation between political parties with a little bit of frankness, because that's what we're here to do we don't get to solutions unless we are open and honest about where we are. And to say that politics has deteriorated in the last, I would say, 2 or 3 election cycles. That spirit that you talked about, that you would experience, is not something that is readily experienced. It is definitely not something that this party and its membership and its leadership experience, and that is sad. Obviously, it is something that we would want to understand. How do we recapture that bipartisanship? Part of it, and part of the issues that I have experienced personally, and I've spoken about these already, and I would re-emphasize them for here, is the nature of consultation that governments often seek to entertain. We probably need to define consultation. The Guyanese constitution is one that gives us ideas about what that should look like, because often the view of consultation is that I call you to a meeting, we sit down for 5 minutes, and you can go through the door and you're going to say, you talk to the Democratic Labour Party. No, you have not. You called me to a meeting. That is not consultation. And I would say I take offense to that kind of approach on behalf of the membership of this party, on behalf of any right-thinking Barbadians as well. And we have to get serious about our politics. I have talked about new politics. I'm definitely and deadly serious about it. I think if we really, really, really want to develop this country, you cannot, and I've talked about this before, you cannot have a situation where half the country is excluded depending on what shirt or color you wear, because your government, in inverted commas, is not in power. Barbados is a small place, and you have to realize that there's intellectual capital and capacity. Look at the members and the people on these walls. These are builders of Barbados. As equally, tomorrow when you go to DLP headquarters on Robert Street, you will see men and women who are builders of Barbados. The contribution of these men and women here are as good as any, surpassed in some instances, and that's just the reality. But together, they form the combination of this country. Unless we recognize that that is how Barbados has to move forward, we will always end up in these cycles of back and forth and half developments. I would hate to see the day that Barbados gets that some of the experiences that we see in other countries of half-built projects, because one government starts it, the other doesn't understand how to continue, and the next one comes in, another cycle, and you're back and forth. I think we can do better than that. The reform of these kinds of commissions are important. I think one of the places to start is how do we achieve real consultation between government and opposition, and one that actually allows informed decision-making and not just for the face of box sticking to claim that you're consulting. I find that demeaning, and it doesn't help the democracy. The second thing that I want to speak very strongly about is how do you ensure that the two-party system survives? If anyone knew Owen Arthur and knew him well, and perhaps some of the members here on this committee would have known him, his devising the formulation for the subvention of political parties came from his own experience in opposition when the Barbados Labour Party was on its knees. And he understood that political parties require funding. They require some sort of support in order to survive, because it's a two-party democracy. And if you don't have the two functioning, democracy does not work. It doesn't matter how you pretend, how you try to create the facade of democracy, or that this is how, it doesn't work. You need that creative tension in order to bring out the best in the system. So I would say that one of the remits, or one of the things that this committee needs to devise, is how do we get that subvention to the current basically extra parliamentary opposition. The Democratic Labour Party won a substantive enough of a vote. That didn't translate into seats because of the first past the post system. If we had proportional representation, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, because we know that we'll be in Parliament. The reality is that also disadvantages our political parties. You know, often parties talk about reform when they're on the other side. There are points when the Barbados Labour Party, they were big on reform because they were down. You know, but the reality is somebody has to be grown up enough to take the decision of what is good for Barbados and what is good for this country, beyond sometimes the politics of the situation. So I would tell you, reform, we need some consultation. We need to think seriously about how this party, as a functioning part of our democracy, as a party steeped in the heritage that helped to create modern Barbados as we see it, some of the very decisions coming out of this very building that you're sitting in, this very place, how do we help this party to function at its optimum for the benefit of the democracy? And that is an important thing. And part of that functioning is how do we ensure that the subvention and the system that was designed to help fund and support political parties, how does the party get that subvention that is available and that should be available to it in this state? Whether it has a seat or not, I do not think that that was the spirit of how the subvention was designed. And that is something that has to be taken very, very seriously, unless and I don't like to impugn improper motives, unless the motive is to, at all costs, try to destroy or harm the Democratic Labour Party. That I will not impugn, so we wouldn't even go there. So I'm sure we will find a way to ensure that the Democratic Labour Party benefits from the support that was devised in the spirit, and let me say this as a lawyer, and Chatham, you would know, in the spirit in which it was devised, because that is why it was devised. It was devised because the person who devised it understood, and he understood like no other, that a democracy needs both parties. And he understood exactly where this party was because he himself went through it. So he ensured that there was always a way to assist both parties. In terms of broader reforms, in terms of the voting system, we know that the first past the post does not translate into a fair system. I think there's only one or two, I can't recall the correct dates now, but there are only one or two instances where the number of votes actually translated into the number of seats. And I think it was the election that you mentioned, Sir Chatterham, you said that it was close. And I think that's probably one of the few elections where the votes matched the number of seats. Every other situation in Barbados is always skewed one way or the other. Well, we see the effects of that situation now, where the votes and the persons, the good persons in this room and other places who went out and voted for the Democratic Labour Party, those votes did not translate into seats. So it doesn't show and it doesn't reflect the support that the party has, and it doesn't help the democracy. So overall, I would hope that the discussion here and what the membership is able to share, and I'm here to also listen, because that is what this party is about. It's about having open consultations to hear what the membership is going to say, and that can feed into the official report, which we will share with you at some point. I will just let you into a little bit of insight. To be honest, I've been holding back on the report that we have for the Constitutional Review Commission, because I knew this was coming up, and a lot of the issues will probably cross over, so that we would then be able to submit one report covering the issues it would be the same to both commissions, because at this moment, some of the very things that were raised then, I am sure we will raise them again in terms of composition of Senate, first past the post, the powers of the Prime Minister, fixed term elections. Those are some things that we want to see again, that any leader of this country should have the ability to determine the dates of the elections of this country for some form of political advantage and gamemanship, as if it's a game. It's time to stop this foolishness as if politics is some game and you're trying to catch people out. Ooh, I've called the elections and you're not ready. You're not children. That's not points. There's no points to be scored there. And if you think it's funny and it's points, well, then you don't belong in public life and you don't belong in politics. Because the seriousness of the system, you all should know when the elections are. Everybody prepares, you're ready, you come with your proposal, you come with your policies, you have everything in place, and you go forward and you duke it out, you fight it out in a way that is responsible and that you can benefit. Thinking you've caught somebody off guard, really, what do you think you're doing? You really think that helps the country? Do you think that helps anybody? Yeah, you feel good about yourself for 1 minute, but then you look at the broader democracy that suffers in the long term from such gamemanship. It is time that we get serious about our politics. It is time that fixed term elections, not a big deal. Everybody knows when the date is. You just work towards it. That's when it happens every time, every 5 years or whatever we determine that should be, and we move forward. Those are the things that a mature, responsible democracy would seek to do, and those are the kinds of measures that I would support, and I'm sure they're the kind of measures that wider right-thinking Barbadians will also support who want to see this democracy to grow, and it's something that the young people will support. And I will say this, and I just wrap up, and I reserve my right to interject at some of the point. Given that you're in my house, I would like to feel that I do have that right. But I will say this, and this is a very serious thing. I was. Do not take it, I think we need to stop taking it for granted that they believe in independence in the way that your generation and perhaps my generation did. They are, in a way, questioning the very nature and the very point of independence. And we need to pay attention to it, because it is something that if we don't put our finger on and find a way to deal with, we're going to land ourselves in serious trouble. And we take it for granted that they're buying into the project in the same way. And if you interact with enough young people and talk to them, they'll tell you things like, well, independence, I know we're going to republic, we talking about, with the benefits. They feel that there's a lot of burden, but few benefits. And that is not, something is amiss there. There's a cultural shift, and we have to put our finger on it. I interact with young people a lot because of what I teach. But you have to talk to them, and just generally on the campaign trail. And it's something I think we really, really, really have to drill down. What is happening with that younger generation, 90s? So I would say born from like early 90s and up. How are they starting to interact with the systems? How do they feel about these systems and these reforms? And maybe they're not necessarily buying into them the way that, the pride that you talked about. You know, you were like, oh, I was there, and I felt that a lot of them like, well, actually, yeah, we're independent, but what does that mean? How is that translating to anything to make my life better, or how is the systems working to benefit me, whether it's the political system, whether it's the support of the economic system? And what we have to recognize is all of these things tie in together. So you're talking about parliamentary reform, but the parliamentary reforms have to be cognizant of what are the effects on the wider economy. So how does your parliamentary reform, for example, affect wealth distribution? Have you guys thought about that? How is this linked to wider reforms in terms of, health care issues, and in terms of certain areas may have poor health care, or, other areas are welfare? How does this deal with the fact of even improving school grades across the system? How does this affect the fact that you want people to be doing better? So I think, whatever you're doing here, you have to, and I'm sure, Comrade, or do I use Commissioner Maxine? Which hat?
Comrade in here.
Comrade in here. I am sure Comrade Maxine, with her financial, economic hat, is seeing that connection, because often we make these institutional reforms and we make them void of the kind of wider society we're trying to create. So I would hope that you are cognizant of that what you're doing, the reforms affect the wider Barbados and what we're trying to create. So the question at its core is, what kind of Barbados do we want? Yeah, I can talk about senates and 5 senates and all these things, tick, box, after one, ad nauseum. Lots of bright people here. Between yourself, myself, must have got 500 degrees. The others in here, all these people bright. We could talk this all night. But at the end of the day, what will Barbados look like after all of this? And I think perhaps that needs to be a point in the back of our heads, and then we work out the systems that will get us to this Barbados. Otherwise, we end up piecemealing things. You want a little bit of that, a little bit of there, but it's not adding up to the whole story. I will now give way, and I encourage the membership of the Democratic Labour Party. I encourage them to be vocal, and that's within the DNA of the party, and to share their experiences. And I myself will be taking note, because from some of the ideas that will come forward here, we would collate that and have our internal discussions as we would report to the Commission. So thank you very much again for being here, and a warm welcome on behalf of the Executive, the General Council, the membership, and the family of the Democratic Labour Party for being here with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I will start as I get ready to open the floor and allow these persons to find seats with the two questions posed by President Ronnie Yearwood. At the end of his contributions, I think he's highlighted a number of critical things. As we contemplate parliamentary reform and undertake to hear and analyze the several recommendations that are being made, what kind of Barbados do we want? And at the end of the day, when we agree on a set of reforms, the other question is, what will Barbados look like? And recall that the intention is to enhance the quality of our democracy. I now invite you to signal your intention to speak, and I will recognize, I see Mr. Michael Carrington's hand up first. You have the mic, sir. Okay.
Good night. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good night, Mr. Commissioner and your members. I think that where we ought to begin, where we want to begin, is what is the mischief we're trying to correct. I know that if we look around, there will be a number of suggestions about changing the Senate, whether there should be one house or one chairman and so on. But I want to suggest that if we can put our hands on what is the real mischief, then the other aspects become easier. For me, the real mischief, there are two big problems. One is that we say that we are following the Westminster system, which is supposed to subscribe to the separation of powers. You have the executive that sets policy, the legislature that puts the legislation in place, and then the judiciary that enforces it or interprets it. But is that really so? We also say that this Westminster system, when you look at it, it was really supposed to foster collaboration. So even if you look at the present arrangement, you have, the Constitution does not recognize political parties. So you have 30 elections, if you wish to say so. 30 members are elected. Then they're supposed to choose a prime minister, and then you choose an opposition leader, and so on. And it would seem to me that the idea was to get consensus. But because we have put the political party on top of that arrangement, whether or not it is 24-3, 27-2, 30-0, whatever, 16, 14, whatever, irrespective of the composition of the House, essentially there's no consensus because things are set up in such a way that the victorious party gets its way each and every time. And that is the biggest problem. It gets its way each and every time. We talk about one question, whether there should be 30, whether it should be even, should be even an even number of constituencies. I don't know. If you have an even number, yes, there will always be at least, to me, if it's 15, then of course something has to be put in place. But what happens if there's an uneven number? And you find that there's a fellow called the Speaker who was appointed. You then have an even number, and you can find yourself with a hung parliament. And do you want that? So I'm saying that if we seek to put in place a system that ensures that there is consensus, then we can consider the other questions and we can find some answers. So that the question of whether or not the political party should be defined, whether it should be institutionalized, to my mind, the answer is no. The political party just happen to be a set of people who see themselves as a common interest. And it means, too, for the other party, the other person who says, look, I do not buy into the philosophy of either A or B. You know, what is he supposed to do? He has no say in his country? That does not make sense, you see. So there has to be provision for persons who do not buy into either of the philosophy of either of the parties. And by the way, I don't think that that anybody has to ensure the survival of a particular political party. Political parties will come and go. In Barbados, we happen to have two. We happen to have two. But we could just as easily have 4 or 5. Okay? So I want to put, I can't say I reserve to myself the opportunity to come back and speak. And say, this is not my house. But I just want to start there. I will make other comments if given the opportunity. I have looked at some of the questions that you want answered and so on, but I think that to put it in context, I want to suggest that we have to try as much as possible to find a system that fosters consensus and that allows us to deal with the theory that we are supposed to be following. I thank you.
Yes, thank you. Before you go, Dr. Chandler wants to answer your question.
Good
Yes,
night,
sir.
everyone. Good night, sir. I
night.
recognize you as the former Speaker of the House of Assembly.
Yes.
And
yes.
the MP for a constituency that I know very well.
I know about it.
So I take your point on the odd number, even number, because the thing is that people, you know, it sounds like minutiae, but it's very important because the ironic thing is that even numbers produce odd numbers and odd numbers produce even numbers.
Yes.
And when you have the speaker in play, you want an even number. But in relation now to what you said about political parties, now the proposition has been put on the table to have proportional representation. But proportional representation systems work on parties and not people. Well, first past the post works on people and not parties. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, I don't know if they can be easily reconciled. I support, in principle, the whole concept of proportional representation. Maybe you can have a hybrid system. And the same thing would come up when it has to do with looking at the whole question of the participation of women in politics. We have grappled with this matter throughout the Commonwealth, and I think when we attended one of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's meetings, we set some benchmarks, and it was suggested that at least 30% of the House should be male. Now, if you want that, you may have to say, okay, we're going to set aside those seats, either have some special election, or just appoint them, you see. So in the same way, you can look at that. Maybe what we need is a hybrid system, partly elected and partly proportional. To me, that is the only way really of dealing with it.
Okay, and I think, so this is not saying that I agree or disagree, but in terms of what you said, that would cover what you said at the end as well in terms of political parties that haven't emerged yet as full-fledged political parties, because if you had proportional representation, in theory and in practice, it would make way for smaller parties. So you would have a situation with first past the post, giving rise to the entrenched parties through their representatives, and the proportional representation part giving rise to the entrenched parties plus the minority parties. So you might have then a more representative system in Barbados if you were to go down that road. Not that I'm saying you need to go down there, but I get where you're going with that.
But I agree with you, because there's no reason under the sun why there should only be the Democratic Labour Party and the Barbados Labour Party in Barbados. There's no reason. It has happened. That's how it has emerged. But like I said before, you may find people who don't buy in to the philosophy of either of those parties. And aren't we stunting their growth, in a sense, by saying, look, okay, there are these two established parties, and therefore we need to work around them, you see? So I'm saying that we seem to be agreeing, only not that that's what you're saying, but we seem to be agreeing in sorts, and I think that hybrid system would probably suit our purposes best. Thank you.
Wait, one last thing. You mentioned having a consensus system. Right now, I'm guessing you think it's too conflictual, but when you look at how Parliament started, like in England, though we're supposed to be becoming a republic, but just looking at where the Westminster system came from, you know, this whole concept of Parliament being the highest court in the land, which is not in Barbados, but historically, you know, Parliament was actually convened as a court to deliberate, to deliberate on cases. And in the common law system, there's always just a conflictual system. So are you looking for a change in culture in Parliament where there's more consensus?
To my mind, Parliament is still the highest court in the land in the sense that it passes legislation, but we can debate that. I am just suggesting that before we had this animal called the political party, after an election, in order to get policy through the House, you had a situation where the various members had to reach some consensus. This is what I want to do. Now, right now, even when there are the two parties, no matter whether it's 16, 14, or whatever, basically the cabinet decides, look, this is what we want to do. And if the cabinet is large enough that it comprises a majority in the House, the cabinet doesn't need anybody else. You go to Parliament and say, look, this is what the cabinet wants, the executive wants, we pass it, and it's law. So is that really what we want? I want to suggest no, that is not satisfactory. And I'm saying that is what we should also be dealing with.
Okay, before you go, Senator Thompson wants to propose.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just one question, please. Did I understand you to say that you wouldn't want to see the definition of a political party enshrined in law?
I wouldn't want it in the Constitution.
But in other legislation?
If, for example, you put it in the Representation of the People's Act, would you disagree with that?
I would have to see the definition before I comment, because right now the political party is just a number of people who get together and say, look, this is what we want. We call ourselves the NDP or the New Democratic Party or something like that. Put their constitution, etc. No definition or anything like that, and it survives. It has helped, and it is recognized, but. Of course, it's not recognized in the Constitution. But I'm suggesting that maybe it's better to leave it as it is, rather than tie in people's hands and say, look, if you want to take part in politics, you have to have this structure and so on. And I think what we have now is better.
So my other question would be, if you're not going to enshrine it, would you regard the political party as because if you link it to the issue of subventions, would you regard the grouping as having to survive beyond one political cycle, beyond one election, to be regarded as a political party?
Well, I think that we will have to firm up the policy with respect to that. I think right now, in order to get the subvention, you have to have won a seat, and you have to have run at least 10 candidates in the preceding election. I think that's the case, Ms. Eastman. Right? I think that is the case. Now, if you put those you can put those kind of things in place without necessarily putting a definition of a political party in place. I mean, it's in place already now. We don't have a definition of a political party. Right. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carrington. And I'm sure as former speaker, when we come to some other issues, we may be able to benefit from your experience. I invite Ms. Felicia Dujon to the mic, and it is a little tall, I believe. Felicia Dujon. Yes, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, comrades. Thank you for being here with us this evening. I'm going to deal with a very unpopular topic this evening, which deals with honesty in politics. It also deals with the code of ethics in politics, which is a much debated discussion right now. I think the House of Commons in the UK just had a discussion of that on the 23rd of October, where the discussion primarily is, should we make lying a criminal offense to politicians and MPs? And I think that has brought much debate, not only in the UK as to what is happening with the ex-Prime Minister, saying that he may have misled the House. So the question that I have seemed to be raising, it was quite a very good discussion on BBC Today. If you have an opportunity, you should listen to it as well. The question that usually tend to pose is what happens when MPs, elected members of parliament, engage in unethical practices, whether it means harassment, whether it's abuse, intimidation. How do we deal with those factors? Are there clear codes of conduct that either Parliament or the Commissioner or someone or a group or committee deals with such matters? Because we know what happens if an elected member is engaging in any of those practices, whether, and I say harassment in various ways, it could be sexual harassment, it could be financial abuse, it could be intimidation of whether it is their own members or even their constituents. What are the kinds of provisions or mechanisms that are in place to reprimand or even investigate the allegations? The reasons why I'm bringing those scenarios up is because we had a very recent matter where we have an elected member who was accused of rape. And such matters are issues, are very serious issues that we need to look at in terms of how do we deal with such matters if we're looking in terms of a progressive society. The other issue that I would like to address also is in terms of water. We do understand that there is the Privileges Council or Privileges Committee that deals with when members, elected members, but again, that is between themselves if they abuse other colleagues or things of that nature. But how does the constituents, so for instance, if an elected member abuses a constituent, intimidates a constituent, what are the mechanisms that are in place? Or do they have to wait another 5 years to reprimand, or how does that work? They must have mechanisms to deal with that, to bring back what would say the recall or the consequences of some actions. So code of ethics has to be clearly defined, which is what we're seeing happening in the UK right now. People are saying, well, if members of parliament are not being honest, what should we do? Even if there is code of ethics, what is the way that we reprimand them? And we can understand if we have a government with 30 seats, who is going to reprimand them? And if the constituents have concerns with a particular member, an elected member, the question again raises, do we wait another 5 years or when election is called to reprimand the individual? Considering if it's not a legal matter, a criminal matter, so if we have persons that engage in such actions, illegal, I would say unethical actions like bribery, things of that nature, intimidations of constituents, how do we deal with such matters? Because we know there are cases or claims of sexual misconduct and things of that nature, concerns of those matters. So what are the mechanisms that are in place that we need to think seriously? Because remember, even with thinking of politicians, they're also human beings, and they must have ethical guidance or ethical codes by which those individuals, this is not about you just winning seats, but how do you conduct yourself in public life? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recognize, yes. Yes, you're the next.
Yeah, I have a blue shirt on for tonight. I got a red shirt on for tomorrow, so. I can't find the yellow, so I gotta go buy some yellow tomorrow. Yeah, I would like to, first of all, disagree with just about everything this guy said. That's Mr. Calendar. He's supposed to be Mr. Schoolmates, and I even forgot the man's name already. I don't know. Constitution mentions a political party with freedom of association.
Could you give your name for the record, please? We've been asking contributors to do that. I know your name, so can I call it then? Mr. R. Edwards, go ahead, sir.
I was going to sit back down before having to do that, but...
Well, I've done it, so go ahead. And your voice is recognizable.
Oh, is that right?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
I've been told that so many times, but I have a neighbor with a similar voice, so I think we tend to get confused sometimes.
But you used to call me a lot for 10 years.
No, but the Constitution talks about the freedom of association and stuff, and I'm sure somewhere in that line, that paragraph, they got the word political party mentioned specifically, all right? That is a mention of the political party in the Constitution. And all these lawyers inside here are not going to admit that. The Constitution does speak to the political party, okay? So I am sorry, my man, you are wrong, dead wrong. Secondly, I'm not about majority rule or percentage, what do you call it? Proportional. Democracy to me means of the people for the people. So whether it's majority or it's complete, or just one person, you still got to talk about of the people for the people. I'm a producer. I manufacture stuff. And my representative is always on about Barbados' future is in services. Even my representative here before, same thing. Barbados' future is in services. How does that ever represent me? Because I'm being represented on a geographical basis. When since 1958, 52, it should have been recognized that people need to be represented based on their interests and not where they live. But somehow up to this day, when they still get on with this damn thing. And that is why political parties are mentioned, because they only survive because people are represented based on this geographic thing. And what happens is you get into the lower house and everybody arguing and talking big, whether it's 1570, 1560 or 30 love. And they're talking and they're trying to appeal to a speaker. But the speaker ain't got no power. The only power a speaker has is to shut somebody up, send them out, and yet they pass legislation. I want to be represented, but not because you're passing legislation that would hardly mean anything to me, because legislation only gets implemented if a chief of police decides, well, I will initiate or I will not. Otherwise, it just will be observed in the breach, which normally happens when you're dealing with big ups and stuff. I want to be represented, and I want to be represented where it matters, and that is where money is spent. But that don't happen in the lower house. That even happen in the upper house. People arguing strong, arguing big, trying to appeal to a president who ain't got the power neither. So you got these two houses where people arguing big and having more talk than the next man, they tell you something really impressive on television, trying to appeal to a person that has absolutely no power. The power resides in another house that I don't even know what the place looks like. I've never been into this room. Maybe my ex-representative would have been inside there. Maybe you've been inside there. It's called a cabinet. That's where all the power resides. And one person decides where that money is spent. Back in the day, this gentleman was prime minister. He used to walk with a black box. So it meant that not even the members of the cabinet knew what was in that black box. So that means only one person knows how and where the money is spent. Now, I don't know how you can have representation of someone like me who wants to vote for someone in a geographical location, who goes to speak in a house, lower house, that ain't got no power, who refers things up to our upper house that speaks to the president who ain't got no power, and all of a sudden somebody comes to a black box where money should be spent, and it don't come to me. But that representation of the people for the people means I should be represented as well. And the only way I will get represented is if I'm respected as an interest, special interest. I don't care about Westminster as far as I'm concerned as a colonial throwover. I don't care about the design of the Houses of Parliament because lawyers design them there. Me and lawyers don't get along. We never really get along. They design these parliamentary things and they're wearing all the fancy coats and they're talking real pretty. And at the end of the day, I get nothing. I need to be represented because I have a particular interest. Either I'm a manufacturer or a retailer. My next door neighbor is bringing beer car parts and stuff. And if you start importing things that I manufacture, we're going to have a problem. But then I can't go and tell my representative, my lady, my next door neighbor is working against my interests. I need somebody who will represent me as a manufacturer. Somebody will represent him as a retailer or a vendor or whatever it is that he does. And those are the lines that should be, that is how this thing should have been designed in the first place. You can tinker all you want. If you have a bad design, all you'll be doing is trying to improve on a bad design, and you still end up with a bad design. If the premise is wrong, anything that follows is going to be just as bad. I am sorry. I think Barbadians should be wise enough to recognize that the different interest groups have sufficient power, sufficient responsibility to decide for themselves who will represent them. Not a political party. The teachers should decide who should sit in cabinet as the head of the Minister of Education. Defense and security, all the people, the policemen and the soldiers should get together and determine for themselves who should be the Minister of Defense and Security. Cultural industries, health people that drive ambulances and stuff. In fact, the people that drive ambulances should have 2 votes. One for the Minister of Health and one for the Minister of Transport. So they get 2 votes. I'm a person who is when I'm laughing at that don't make sense. I would like very much to be involved with what do you call these things now? The shoreline and the turtles and the preservation, environmental things. I am involved with those kind of things too, so I should get a second vote. I should be able to vote for the person who represents the environmental issues, the blue economy and that kind of things. Not a political party. Political parties are designed as a group of people who are only there to win an election. Not because they're going to set up policies. They will tell you what they have to tell you to win an election. They will do what needs to be done. And to my mind, if you're going to speak about a code of ethics, Every member in this house is a member of a professional group. You know a lot of these faces inside here. And they should be guided by the code of ethics that are determined by the professional association that they're associated with. The law profession has about 10 pages of code of ethics going on. They tell these lawyers how they should dress, even. They tell them how they should behave with the wives. That's how strict these things are. When you are in your private lives, you have to behave a certain way. It's ridiculous, but it controls you. It's the most controlling piece of, and in fact, it's legislation too, by the way. And my argument is, and it has always been, with these guys here, I'm sorry, but in reality, the code of ethics determine lawyers are supposed to be the ultimate. That's how strict these codes of ethics are. And they are not supposed to be involved with any kind of association where the integrity could be brought into question. And you got this political party whose only reason to be on this earth is to win the election, and they will get money from A, B, C. You don't know who these people are? You don't know who they are? They even got from government, probably from China. One time it was from Hong Kong and China at the same time. You don't know how, when, how much, or anything. And they keep that secret from the public. And it is no dictionary in the world that could say that I am wrong in saying that that is unethical in behavior. You've taken money from all of these people to win an election, and lawyers should be involved with that there. That is unethical. Accountants should not be involved with them there. That is unethical behavior. And because the code of ethics is, I believe it is coded in law, right? The code of ethics of the lawyers are considered law. If a lawyer is involved with a political party that borrowing money from all over the place and telling the body where it is, it should be illegal for them to be part of that activity. But yet, here we are. And we arguing these little fine details and fine changes. I just seek to be represented because I have a special interest and not because I live in a particular geographic location. And I think I've just said that this parliamentary design is a total and complete waste of time. Mr. Barrow, Sir Errol, right honorable, excellent, became independent in 1966. He severed control. He probably had to answer to a governor. And from 1966, he answered only to himself. Sir Errol, or excellent Errol Barrow, became independent, not me, not nobody else inside there. One person became independent, and that followed on from that point up to this day. So if we're moving from independence to republic, that don't change anything. We're going to change the process to a way that means something, of the people for the people. Not majority rule, not proportional, just of the people for the people. And people, to my mind, represent interest groups, not geographic location. That's insulting. No, I just breathe once, so let me breathe a little bit. Thank you very much.
While you breathe, thank you very much. I know how passionate you get on these matters, but so having said that, and understanding the terms of reference of this commission, what really would you want to see us do? I've heard you in terms of your feeling about what democracy ought to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
What if you had to say 2 or 3 things that we should do? What is your position on our task, essentially?
I mean, what you possibly can do for this point moving on, based on what I've said, because I mentioned the same thing back to Mr. Branca back in 1992 or something. And his response was, I've been through all these constitutions, and I've never seen this thing mentioned before. I mentioned this thing at a law guy that came in, an expert, about 4 months ago at UE. He was speaking about all these various constitutions about the place. And I said to him very simply, why can't teachers determine who their own minister is? Well, is that a problem? Why can't cultural specialists determine who them? And he says,
How would that work?
But you just do it. I mean, I do not care how the teachers get done. They might decide, okay, I got to put everybody in there. You want to run, put a boxing glove on. Whoever wins the fight, you can determine. It's up to them to determine how they get their person up inside there. So I can't tell them, is their own, a policeman may decide, let me go for the best marksman. Whoever or however it is done, when they get to determine who their person is, that's their business. That is not mine. But then when you get all of these big men and women around the table, they will have to determine of course, you can need a head of state. Of course, you can need somebody who will determine at the end of the day, well, something. I think you're being unreasonable here. You need somebody that can manage people with big egos. Not somebody who could talk pretty in public. People who know how to manage. When these guys get to the table, they're going to have the biggest possible egos available. But this person who is the head of state, because the Queen of England is supposed to be head of state, but she really has no power now. But this person, I'm sorry, it's a he now, I'm sorry. When you live with somebody all your life and all of a sudden that person disappears, you can forget that the person gone. So you know. Bear with me. She's still here as far as I'm concerned. She's been around for a long, long time.
I think Dr. Chandler wants to ask you a
I
question,
thought it was
sir.
clear you asked the question still. All right, go along, go along.
You were clear. You were clear.
Thank you very much.
I really do understand what you're saying. And
Oh,
I
you
heard-
do? I'm glad to hear
and
that,
I heard
thanks.
all of the propositions you had in there. So,
Good, okay.
you know, one country that doesn't have a system kind of like yours is the Republic of Ireland, where, for example, the universities get to elect senators to represent the community, and different communities get to do the same there. So it's not geographic, but interest. But in your case now, you're speaking about cabinet where you see the power lying for you, and you want a situation where various ministries, because they basically manage interests, you have people who are beneficiaries of those ministries elect the people who will be heading the policy element, the ministers for those.
Correct. And they're paid a stipend, not a salary, by the way.
Well,
They're not executive, they're just board members.
oh, okay. Just
So it will cost us less.
no. So for curiosity's sake, so I understand all that, so I don't really have any questions on that. But since you mentioned the stipend, what would the stipend be?
Well, yeah, you know, let them fight it out. That's not my boy. You want every detail from me? I give you the broad parameters. The details you can work
I
out.
hear
You know.
I've heard you over the years with Dennis Johnson. May he rest in peace. And
You sure it's
down
me?
the-
I got a neighbor with the same voice. I keep saying.
It might be somebody else, you know.
No,
And,
but-
so I just because we have to basically solicit from the public, you know, their ideas. So if you had like a general figure in mind, what would it be?
Oh, you mean for the stipend?
Yeah.
I don't know. When Pine Hill Dairy had their little thing going, I think the directors had. You were on the board. Pine Hill Dairy was like $260 per meeting or something, and they met once every 2 or 3 months. Basic lunch money and transportation.
Okay, I will take the substantive point that you made and
Yeah,
leave it there, right?
because the policy is what is important, not so much your salary. You know, you want to do the best, and you're already being paid anyhow. In fact, I tell you the truth. I just didn't mean to cross you like that. It may very well morph into a process where each interest group will start to pay perhaps someone to be the lobbyist that sits on the board. So that person will draw a big salary, but not the taxpayers' money. That will come from the interest group. Taxpayers won't be burdened with that kind of $14,000 a month foolishness.
Well, thank you.
Is there any country that even fought to that?
His loyalty will lie with the people he represents. But come on, man. I think that people go get beyond the money thing, man. But I'm wearing a blue shirt, so I got to agree with everything you say right now.
Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, thanks too.
Mr.
Yeah.
Edwards. Are there any others? There's a hand at the back. Verla De Pisa, former party leader, you have the floor. And an attorney, so I don't know how, well, Mr. Edwards has finished speaking, so.
Good evening, everyone. I'm one of those who also needs some help with the height part. Thank you. It's probably better if I do this, because that's playing its own game. Good evening, everyone. First of all, welcome to George Street. Some of you, it may well be the first time you've been here. I am less concerned about those things that I have heard this evening. I'm more concerned about how our people get involved. And I think that maybe, I don't really know how this commission lies in relation to the larger commission dealing with the Constitution itself and the reform of the Constitution. But to my mind, if you are thinking about reforming Parliament, you're really thinking about reforming how we are governed. I don't know how wedded we are to the Westminster system that we inherited and that we borrowed from somewhere else. That doesn't even work for them, and they've fiddled with it over time, and whether or not we need here in Barbados to retain that. I ask that because I am taking very careful note of the apathy that is sinking in Barbados, the number of persons who are opting not to be any part of the process that we have right now, and looking for ways in which we can improve the participation and the expectations as well, because I think the lowered expectation is what has people not wanting to be a part of the system at present. I'm thinking along the lines of the constitutional positioning of constituency councils or constituency government, some element of devolution from central government, and having that within the Constitution as well, because what that does is invite greater participation. I mean, it may still be open to infiltration by groupings like political parties, and as an aside, even though I don't wish to have a moment on that this evening, I too do not support having political parties within the Constitution. I don't think they need to be entrenched. But to have ways and means and mechanisms where more of our people can be involved, I think is something that we need to consider. I don't know that I have the actual answer, but certainly if we are all knocking our heads together, we can come up with something that is ours, that works for our people, that is not necessarily borrowed wholesale. It is okay if you know, have to spit and polish and put a little sandpapering on somebody else's thing. We may even mesh more than one system together. But once what we end up with is the Barbadian thing, quintessentially us, that going forward we can even build on over time. I'm thinking about how the Americans just disassociated themselves when they emancipated themselves from their colonial rule and created their own system. And perhaps we are at that stage in our own national development where we have to consider what we want for ourselves as opposed to what other persons gave to us. So I am very much in tune to any mechanism that allows the ordinary Barbadian, more of us, to get involved, not just 60 plus how many ever in Senate, but that we spread it out. And we can decide how we manage between the local government and the national government. We can decide how it is that we share up the business of running the country. But certainly if our people found themselves in a position where they thought that they were more involved in the process, we might be in a position to address that sinking number every single election of less and less of our people being involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before you go further, Sir Roy has a question.
Don't run away, Verla.
I'll never run from you, Sir Roy.
You should never run away from me. I hope you wouldn't. I want you to spend a bit more time putting some flesh on those bare bones that you have put before us, looking at how, though you don't have an exact figure, but I still want you to look at how you would develop that and what would be your aims in developing that, either on a constituency basis or whatever other basis, how you would endeavor to meet the expectations of other minority groups or interest groups that you might be considering. Could you give it some development?
Well, I actually did a paper and I submitted it to the other commission, and I can flesh it out. That is not a problem. What I am thinking, leaving the national aside, because I think we can have a greater understanding of what a national government ought to do. But I'm thinking that if we have the constituency or even parish, it doesn't have to be by 30, it could be 12, counting the city as one. If it is that we have that local government, which we did have before, looking after the things that are bugbears for a community, the budget would need to be a significant one, not in the manner of constituency councils before, because I'm thinking in terms of the management of infrastructure that is not necessarily nationally grid-tied. So we would need to be dealing with the local roads as opposed to the highways. I'm thinking in terms of garbage collection and other municipal concerns right now, which need not be centrally managed. I'm thinking that if we have, even if interest groups, which Art is interested in, even if interest groups find their home in that local government more so than in a parliamentary government, because if we are going to speak of interest groups, then we'll have a myriad of permutations and combinations, and I don't know that we'll be able to house them, never mind accommodate them in any other way. However, if it is that in the devolution process, we are looking to have those interests accommodated, then we do still meet the requirement, the hope that we spread what government can do, and government now with a larger picture and wearing different hats. That, from the perspective of the local government, would then leave the national government to deal with the issues in terms of that larger infrastructural picture that requires that sort of coordination that looks towards the region, that has an international face. So we would then have the pressing concerns, because and I'll just be very frank, right now we're hearing about how wonderfully well Barbados is doing internationally. Locally, we are feeling something completely different. But if it is that we were to have that dichotomy addressed in a meaningful way, where we could have persons on the ground dealing with the things, the nitty-gritty that matters to the average Barbadian, whilst having that outward-facing representation as well in a different context, then maybe we would have greater comfort as Barbadians that the things that matter to us are actually being addressed. And I think that really ought to be the focus of any governmental change that we make, any parliamentary change that we make, that our people are satisfied that their interests are being met. That really has to be the bottom line. That has to be the thread running through whatever it is that we do. It is not about accommodating who already exists. It is about finding that thing that makes the citizen feel like they're actually a part. And this may seem really, really weird, but if you could look all the way back to the times of Aristotle, and you will see models that we have left behind. We speak of democracy, but we don't actually practice it. So if it is that we were to take ourselves back to school, Political Theory 101, and understand those fundamentals, then maybe it is that we would be able to address the 21st century concerns, because the foundation is not going to change. The foundation is not going to change. How we manage the building that goes on top of the foundation is what we fix up. You will not keep your 1960s kitchen. You're going to put in some granite countertops, and you will change the features. So what I'm hoping is that we are not just in a tinkering exercise, but that we are looking to make those fundamental changes that will impact on the psyche of our people, that will make them feel like they must be a part of the process.
Okay,
I have just one.
So Roy, continue.
You want to talk?
Yes.
No,
So
I had a follow-up, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, wearing other clothes, I have been close to that discussion you are presenting about the grassroots involvement. And you mentioned questions like garbage collection. I imagine that housing would be part of that same consideration as well. And my question when I have discussed this has always been, how are we going beyond the rhetoric? How are we going to construct or reconstruct, put together the framework for making that vision into a reality? Where do we meet the costs? Where do we meet the structures that would be necessary and the personnel that would be necessary, the governance that would be involved?
I am not going to be naive in thinking that it is not a fundamental change that I am calling for. But at the end of the day, right now, we have a parliamentary building, half of which is disused. The other half is used 2 to 3 days a week. We have a lot of community centers that are underutilized. Some of them have not been open for ages. And quite frankly, they just put some kiosks
on the basketball court of the one in Weston. So, you know, we have space. If it is that we're looking for solutions, I don't think we should be looking to see what are the stumbling blocks we can put in its way. We have space. There is no need for the type of permanent housing that the Parliament buildings represents when speaking about local government. It may perhaps be better that it is itinerant, because if you are looking at the existing constituencies, Sir Richard, your constituency office when you were running for St. Joseph was in town, because if you put it one place in St. Joseph, the rest of St. Joseph could not get there. I know this as a fact. So therefore, if it is that it were itinerant, you would, one, not have to manage property, which quite frankly, government, and this is now not a political statement, it's just another fact, government manages buildings badly. You would not need additional locale. You will need additional funding. Anything that you're setting up for the first time will have startup costs. What you need to do is budget it and then stick to that budget, which is something that we're fairly bad at doing. But if it is that we were to put that structure in place, and I assume your question is in relation to the administration of the process as opposed to the funding of the process, then I do believe, again, that if we are looking at having that local involvement, there would need to be some form of compensation. But quite frankly, I don't know that it needs to be as high as compensation is right now. If it is that we are devolving government, then I would suggest that they devolve some of their salary as well. And that is not a facetious statement, that's just a fact. If you're working less, then you should really get less money. But because we are spreading into local government, I think that we would be able to reach more persons. And I think that is a larger concern than how much is this going to cost. Because right now, the cost of having 40-something% of involvement of our people is really, really bad for our country. So I'm not only going to read it in dollars and cents, I'm also going to read it in the potential that it could have.
Well, a question, if you didn't mind. The call for local government is to go back to what we have had for centuries. We had a vestry system. There are perhaps a lot here who don't even remember that. Every parish had a vestry system, which was a form of local government. And then we had an actual system of local government in the south, in the north, and in Bridgetown.
And then we had the constituency councils.
And then we had a commission that looked at the system of government just about the time of the Federation and said, look, Barbados is a small country, has too many systems. Come on. And we got rid not only of the vestry system over time, but of the local government system. And the illustration always is about garbage collection. The problem is a problem of efficiency in this country.
Yes.
We need
absolutely
improved efficiency,
absolutely,
not improved governmental structures. So we had some submissions about the fact that sometimes in some areas the garbage truck passed once a week or once in 2 weeks. That is inefficiency in the management of the sanitation service. That is a problem of efficiency or lack of it, but not of a need for another system of government. We have passed that. So that call is for us to go back to where we have come from. And it is recognized that Barbados, as a small country, don't need all these levels of government. What we need is improved management and efficiency. That is the big thing that is lacking in this country.
yes. I don't see the two as divorced from one another, though, because when you are speaking about the satisfaction of constituents now, especially those whose representatives are in cabinet and have portfolios to manage, some of those portfolios that take them overseas as well, you find that there is a deficiency in representation at the local level. Using the example of garbage is just one. It is not the only one. If you wish to retain that as a national interest, that's fine. If it is, whichever way that you put it, it needs to be in any way efficient, whichever way you put it. But just because we tried it before and left it does not mean that we can't go back to it. It may well be that we left it too soon, or we ought not to have left it at all. We have to find the thing that works for us. It is fine if we go through the process and we end up not having it, but my concern is that we need to find the ways that get more of our people involved. And one of those ways is to have the devolution of certain types of government business at present.
Okay, I think Commissioner Thompson wants to raise something, and then Commissioner Chandler.
Good evening, Mr. Pease. I really want to thank you for what I thought was a very refreshing submission, and clearly you gave a lot of thought to it.
Thank you.
I do want to ask a question, and it has to do with the way in which you started your remarks, and that is going to the Westminster system and the fact that we are at a point where we could create something indigenous that then becomes a model for other countries. And I wanted to ask if you've given any thought to what that indigenous product might look like, and what a reformed parliament that isn't slavishly following Westminster would look like, and would be able to offer to Barbadians, how you would give larger voice to citizens and to various groups. I would really be very interested in hearing you elaborate on that. I have to tell you, though, that I am erring with Sir Richard. I do not believe that a local government system is necessarily going to deliver greater efficiency and improved implementation. What we have to look at is our management systems and our structures and the level of accountability for doing the job, and the financial resourcing being given to the various agencies that are asked to deliver to the people of Barbados. But that's another discussion we can have another time. I'm interested to hear on the Westminster, or moving away from Westminster and evolving an indigenous model.
I am very interested in exploring the different types of proportional representation. Okay. People speak about it in a lump. There are different types. And I am particularly keen on one that has a stepped system, so that you will have different layers of voting, and you can also vote on specific interests. Now, that is a feature of some of the states in the United States. I believe California is one of them, where your ballot is not just about the federal representation or even the state representation, but goes all the way down to particular issues that you vote on one ballot on one sheet. And I like that idea, because there are several times when, and this is from a citizen point of view now, there are several times when there are issues going through Parliament that you hear a lot of rhetoric about, but especially now with the current 30 Love, you don't get to hear the other side, and sometimes there are 3 and 4 different sides. If you were able to have that input into specific issues, it doesn't have to be everyone, but into specific issues, I think that too would improve the outreach in terms of getting persons involved. You might get someone into the ballot box, for instance, to speak about discrimination, to speak about the environment, who may not necessarily leave home and line up just to mark an X for someone. So I am very interested in having that type of government come to Barbados. I would also like to see the constituencies, and this is going to seem really strange, I would like to see that there be more constituencies. I think some of them are simply too large, administratively too large to manage in terms of both geography and numbers of persons present. Some of them have both problems. Some have one and not the other. And I think it is a step towards feeling represented if you actually have some connection with your representative as well. And part of that process would be that you don't have 10,000 people to look after. Again, yes, there is a cost factor, and we would need to decide what is that level that is manageable for us. But certainly right now, according to the formula of the Representation of the People Act, we are breaching it every single time. But it is because we really can't find the money to make another constituency or 2 or 3 worth it. But I think that would go some way as well. Those are 2 that immediately come to mind, but I am happy to think about it longer than tonight and come up with other formulae for you.
Thank you. Dr. Chandler?
Let me ask you one question, if I may. Microphone. Would be the average size of a constituency that you think would be manageable?
Given what Barbados is, I think the 8,000 mark is reasonable. I think that is reasonable.
You know that some have fallen under that.
Some have fallen under it, some are way over it.
Yes, there are some that are way over it. Particularly in St. Philip, parts of central Barbados, like St. Thomas and so on, but they are, you still can't overdo it. It seems to me that about 8,000 people would be manageable.
Yes.
Yes, but a few are below, actually. The
Only
city
a few.
constituency is contracting very, very rapidly.
Yes.
I'm not too sure what is the other one that is losing voters rapidly. But there's some, particularly in the south and eastern part of Barbados, St. Philip, where the
St. Philip
constituencies
is
are
definitely
very large. But
exploding.
that's understandable, because St. Philip has the biggest parish, was the only area where people could migrate to find land and build houses.
Can I just clarify something?
Before you go, I think Dr. Chandler wanted to raise a question to Ms. DePisa.
Thank you, Mr. Pisa. Nice to meet you.
Same here.
You know, when the seniors speak, the juniors squeak. So, yeah, had to go last. There are so many things I want to say, but time is getting on. So the first one is that you mentioned that we need to find a new way of doing things. I agree. And if you're going to call yourself a republic, you need to actually behave like you're one and find your own way. And on that note, I don't know if Ms. Dujon knows, but she was my tutorial leader in undergraduate, right, when I was doing SciMed Tech. And there was this concept in SciMed Tech about phlogiston, which was a theory about how bodies lose weight, and it was proved to be wrong, right? And then we actually learned scientifically how bodies lose weight when they're burned. And that brought me then to when you mentioned C.L.R. James. Well, I'm mentioning C.L.R. James now, but you mentioned Athens, right? And I thought about C.L.R. James and modern politics, so I had to go and look it up. And he actually says, in an island like Barbados, I believe there is more wealth and material goods accumulated today than existed in all the Greek city-states added together. Yet these states, with Athens at the head, formed, in my opinion, the most remarkable of all the various civilizations which we have recorded in history, including our own. I think it is for us in Barbados to live up to what C.L.R. James said and prove him wrong in terms of Athens and prove him right in terms of Barbados. And if we're going to do that, we have to be more methodical about the things that we do. And even in relation to Sir Richard's question about, you know, what's the optimum number of constituents per constituency, you know, there are academic papers dealing with the communication between representatives and the population within the constituency. And surprisingly, if you apply the models to Barbados, it's going to be a lot lower than 8,000. It's actually going to be around half, right? So, so if we thought scientifically about constituency representation in terms of who a representative can actually touch, you would realize there's only so many people one person can touch.
Yes.
And the number becomes lower, but then the number in the House of Assembly would become greater. And then the question is about cost. So then you mentioned cost in your presentation. And clearly there is this looming question about the cost of democracy, which we brought up before, and the Clerk of Parliament brought up at the Diaspora Town Hall. And the thing about that is that when you start to do a little costing for parliamentary reform and constitutional reform, etc., what you realize is that I think everyone knows something is going to increase, especially if we introduce local government like you're speaking about. Not that I'm a proponent of it, but I'm not against it either. I can see it going either way. I will say, though, that the Cox Commission actually gave reasons for getting rid of it, but then they said we should bring in something like it. So as well, they were saying, we know why we're getting rid of it because we're introducing central government, but there's room for it, right? So I understand that. Now, my question is, how do you envisage political parties helping the country to be able to understand why the cost of democracy is increasing? Because when we look at Jamaica, we realize that, you know, both political parties were in favor and then something happened and then they kind of fell apart, and we don't want that in Barbados. When the cost of democracy increases, how will the political parties, the major political parties, lead the way in terms of consensus building?
Before I get to your question, I just want to make one small point about the statistics. When we're dealing with statistics, especially in a society like ours, we still have to overlay it with our social constructs and not slavishly follow the science. The social aspect of the social science will also be informing where that level falls. To answer your question, though, because for me, political parties are grounded in philosophy, and because for me and this party, the philosophy is also fundamentally based on people and democracy. It is in our very name. It would be incumbent on the political party to be part of that education strategy. I think, too, that your own financial prudence would be one of the greater guides for others. But anytime that we are making fundamental change, where you need buy-in, whomsoever is calling themselves leader, and I'm not speaking about leader of a political party, I'm talking about leader of people. So if it is a teacher in a school, if it is someone running a social club, those of us in here who clearly have a greater interest in politics, it would be incumbent upon us to be part of that education process. So whatever the change is that is being made, we would need to have the buy-in at the top that allows us then to spread the word to the others. So I do see a role for political parties in spreading whatever the gospel is that we decide it is. And this is outside of not wanting them to be manifested in the Constitution itself. I don't know that it needs to be there, but that does not in any way take away from your role in leading, because political parties are obviously leading in the country, and they would have a role then in spreading whatever it is that is decided.
And my last point / question, right, is you mentioned the allocation to, or someone mentioned before, the allocation to various parts of government and the cost. Now, I'm a person who reads the Constitution like people tell little children to read the Bible before night, right? I would lie down with it and kind of, you know, go over provisions, especially, you know, the supremacy clause and things like that, and look at it. Now, when we look at the finance chapter, we see that the House of Assembly has ultimate responsibility for passing the estimates and the appropriation bill. And we had before a proposition about the strength of cabinet, etc. At a previous town hall, I spoke about the relationship between cabinet and House of Assembly. And you are an attorney at law, and there are some attorneys at law here and legal academics as well. And when I look at the actual estimates with the appropriation bill, what I find is that Parliament is constantly, when it passes the estimates in the appropriation bill, Parliament is constantly underfunding itself relative to the executive. Now, that has something to do with the strength of the cabinet within the House of Assembly. How do we correct that so we make sure that Parliament funds itself appropriately?
Well, there are two things. One is, I do believe that any change that we make will need to have some financial oversight of the House of Assembly. I, without boast, found a way to bring the discussion of the budget to Senate, and deliberately so, because I do believe that you have to have, and I did it by private members' resolution. We need to have the conversation about how we spend our money and what we prioritize. That is the place where we need to have the oversight. And that would also govern the under budgeting and the supplementals. The country can't be held to ransom like we keep seeing every half year in the US. But we still need to be sensible in how we do things. The need to budget and stick to budget is the reason why you have the consultation process in the first place. So perhaps not for the Constitution, but for any rules that we have in relation to that process, that we need to be stricter on how we manage that consultation process and the end result of it, and the monies that we determine are in the kitty to be divided up. And then, of course, oversight. I don't think you can ever have too much oversight.
Just one last thing, because you're the only person who's actually brought up this point so far in the town halls, right? You just said not in the Constitution, but what about the fact that the Constitution disallows the Senate from considering money bills?
That was canvassed when I brought the private members bill, but it was how it was worded, because it was congratulating the Minister of Finance on his budget. So then in the congratulatory speeches, we could have free rein on how we spoke to the budget. And I did it because I honestly do think you need to have that other layer of oversight in how we spend our money. It is not just in terms of the appropriation bill, which does come through the Senate, but the two go hand in hand. The appropriation bill means nothing if you're not budgeting. So you have to, it is not much point saying the Senate can deal with one but not with the other. So yes, that's what we have now. Feel free to change it. Yes.
Okay, I think Commissioner
If I could
Beckles
just let
wants
someone.
to, no, they have not finished yet. So
Oh dear,
Hey, good evening.
I'm being grilled.
Good evening, Mr. Pease. I don't want to keep you too long. Now that we are on the issue of, or topic of money, what are your thoughts on the remuneration of parliamentarians?
I don't have any thoughts on the remuneration of parliamentarians. I have greater interest on when they get their pension, which should be exactly when everybody else gets theirs.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
On that note, I think, thank you very much. I think you've made some important. Mr. Edwards wanted to respond, and then the gentleman here in yellow. And if I don't recognize you, I'm fairly nearsighted, so. But I know his voice.
Just very quickly, he should be saying that that the interest groups will be too far and difficult to manage and stuff. Right now, the Prime Minister determines how many interest groups there are in Barbados. Usually, from the time I was born, there were about 9 to 12 ministers in government. This one chose 26 and then reduced it to 25. Never before in the history of mankind has there been so many ministers in any one cabinet. But I believe that we need only maybe 14 interest groups that could easily manage everybody else. So it's not by a lot of people. You have about 15 different churches that could all come together and decide they can have one minister of religion. You know, you only ask the people to decide in that group, right? So there's no point having a large number of interest groups. You can have 15, 14, 12 max, and then you could determine they can have subgroups and subgroups going down. And everything that my friend spoke about, she's still speaking about geographic constituencies, and as you realize, it gets so complex, and you need to get oversight and different kinds of committees going down, and you know, Sir Richard said, you know, we're going back in the past. Is it because you're dealing with the geographic thing again? When you're dealing with interest groups, you ain't got to worry about that foolishness. And interest groups can pay their own people. You ain't got to worry about taxpayers paying them. So to my mind, it's easier, it's implementable, and it is Barbadian, as far as I'm concerned, even though I'm born somewhere else, but that's okay. That's my business, man.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next. Okay, I'm going to ask you in a minute.
Good night, everyone.
Could you-
Hello. Yeah, good night, everyone. I'm coming from a different angle.
Could you give us your name for the record, please?
Errol Hurley.
I got the voice now, thanks.
I want to know about the integrity legislation, about members of parliament lying. Or caught doing underhand deals should be brought before a group and be impeached. I feel we need to start impeaching parliamentarians in this country. Let them face the fight like anybody else, any other Barbadian. Because if you do certain things, you got to go before the Supreme Court. And I believe that impeaching and removing parliamentarians, are talking like a guy from America, right?
That's all right.
Impeach them and remove them because they are not good citizens of this country, when you are misleading people, when you are inside the house, because you have a privilege. And then, as one person said earlier about having to molest people or anything like that, and you can sit down in the house and enjoy your parliament. And if you are found guilty by the police of this country, your members of parliament or whatever committee should impeach you and remove you from parliament because you don't have the integrity to represent those people. That is how I look at it. And I want to know if this commission has looked at anything like that for the legislation to bring people to good governance.
Okay, thank you very much, Errol. I think the issue of a code of conduct and the code of ethics is one that is on the table. Now, could we see a show of hands? This gentleman here, I don't know your name. I see two over here. Mr. I almost call you by your Mr. Highland, Mr. Hunt. So we go 1, 2, 3, and if there are others who want to speak, please. 4. Okay, Ms. Dujan. So you first. Okay.
Good night, everyone. My name is Tyler Grazandi. I was born in Guyana and raised in Barbados.
Give me the name again, please.
Tyler Grazandi. Yes, my forefather was the first governor of British Guyana in 1700 that created the relationship between Barbados and
her
Guyana.
last name for me, please.
Gravesande. Gravesande. Yeah. Yeah, I have a trouble speaking slowly because life is in a fast pace, so I have to keep going. Yeah. Sorry. Yes. I was so eager to come on board to say a word because my brother raised a valid point that needs to be looked into. Integrity. Integrity, transparency, accountability, freedom of information. These are things that are fundamentally important in this country. If we do not fix this issue, we have a whole constitutional reform committee. Now, if this constitutional reform committee, as I remember, I spent a lot of time with historians, centenarians, and thankful for Owen Arthur's intervention in my life for the 4 years I've been educated by him. I stand here as a representative of him. Tyrone Lovell can testify to that too as well. This Constitutional Reform Committee and the fastness in moving towards this, I understand the importance of being independent. But as I can recall, 1937 was an issue. Total power for a government is a problem. Power does not corrupt. Absolute power does. Authoritarianism, despotism is a fact. I am not here to debate on an intellectual level because I can. I'm here to have a discussion about the ground issues on the streets. Is the Constitutional Reform Committee is focusing on the drugs, the guns, the destabilization, the same financiers that I'm associated or aware of that finance political campaigns. There's some kind of accusation that they are associated with in these activities as well. I am not sure of these things, but it's a conversation to have. My question will be to Sir Cheltenham is, how is the Constitutional Reform Committee is looking to implement the integrity legislation that creates transparency and accountability and freedom of information to the people of this country? And my other question is to the encyclopedia with the constitutional laws. My question is, correct me if I'm wrong, so I'm not from any of the schools, I'm not from any of the universities, I was kicked out of all the schools I went to. I'm being honest, I'm self-taught, I'm self-learned, I studied neo-colonialism. And my question to you is, when we are invoking a state of emergency act, when we are having an epidemic or a pandemic, the Constitution gives provision for the dissolving of Parliament, where there is the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Attorney General to be residing over the House, so the funds can be allocated towards the disbursement of the country and the people in the country. Is that what transpired in COVID procedures? And my question is, my question is, how are we focusing on transparency? Transparency to its full entirety. There are youngsters in the streets that are being victimized through a hungry man will eat and a thirsty man will drink. It all depends on who gives them food and water. And I would like to know that this Constitutional Reform Committee is not an invoking of 1937 that causes 1955 to occur. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir Richard, I believe that there was a question to you in relation to, I don't know if you want to respond. Okay.
My friend frequently spoke about the Constitutional Reform Commission, and I just want to remind you that
this is parliamentary.
Chris Blackman, former colleague and former judge, Chief Justice, I believe he was, of Belize at one point, he is heading the Constitutional Reform Commission. That apart, you raised some questions about the justice system and other issues, which is not really our focus. But abuse of citizens' rights by the police is, I suppose, what you were hinting at. And that is a separate matter, which I believe is under constant review. And the recent discovery that they had secret tapes and so on the desks at police stations and all the rest are serious cause for concern. But we are not focusing on that. I share your concern, but that is for another area of the administration of justice, not for us. But I share your concern, but that is not for us. We are neither the Constitutional Reform Commission or the courts. We are the Parliamentary Reform Commission.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I understand where you're coming from. The Emergency Powers Act and the Emergency Management Act They are, to the extent that they relate to Parliament and Cabinet being part of the parliamentary system, pertinent to our remit here today. So the Constitution has provisions for emergency powers. The Emergency Powers Act has provisions for emergency powers, citing the Constitution's provisions verbatim, and the Emergency Management Act has provisions as well. So what happens really and truly is that you have a suite of legislation all dealing with emergency powers for various instances, everything dealing from pestilence, which I think is the word that's used in the Constitution, to all different types of demographic emergencies, etc. And the executive in Barbados is twin-headed, right? In most parliamentary systems, the executive is twin-headed. You have the head of state, the president, and you have cabinet headed by the prime minister. And with the emergency powers, what you find is that both the president and cabinet can exercise management over the emergency powers, depending on the level of severity, right? To the extent that you're asking me a question about what was done right or wrong, I can't get into that. But I get the question you're asking, and if you want to then say that you would like us to spend some time reviewing that portion of the parliamentary system to make sure that we always get it right, then of course we can do that because it's within our remit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Highland.
Good night, everyone. My name is Cardinal Ricardo Highland, and it is spelled Hyland, so I don't want to say it misspelled.
Hyland, not Highland.
Hyland. Now, I want to take a look at the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. Now, Parliament was just blown out of the water with the past two elections. Fortunately, on the first occasion, someone stepped up and took over the leadership of the opposition as who is designated to be the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee. On the second occasion, it happened again, and so far no one have gone that route, and somehow we are still here at a stalemate as to what we can do. My suggestion is all along the opposition taking up the leadership of the Public Accounts Committee was in a position where the reigning government would bring up the things that that previous government had done and they would be looking after, which to me didn't make sense because you're asking the chairman to look at the things that they did. I think that right now we have the makeup of the Senate, 12 government senators and 9 independent ones. I think that we should get one of the independent senators to be the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, and that should be standard altogether, so that you would not call on someone as chairman to investigate the goings-ons of or what went on under his administration. So even if we do have an opposition again, and you have there 2 senators, out of the 7 that would be allocated to the independent senators, I think that they can still be the chairman because they will be more or less neutral, even if you give the opposition the vice chairman. But I think that that would be a good way to go, and it would clear up that anomaly just in case it should ever happen again. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You had another point?
No,
I have a question. Okay, hold on. No, don't run away. Don't run away. Because we can't ask the question until you're finished. Right?
Yeah,
so
we just wanted to make sure
that you were finished your submissions, right? Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you. I hear your voice all the time, but I could be mistaken. But I don't think I am mistaken.
But you don't hear it by that name. So you let it remain under the
But
radio name.
geographical location.
Yeah. You come from an area with which I'm well familiar, but we'll talk about that another time.
Feel free.
So, in relation to the point about the Public Accounts Committee, what if it is said that over the years we found that the Public Accounts Committee, being chaired by the leader of the opposition, comes across as an opposition-led commission or committee, and that independent senators may not want to see themselves in the role of opposition, where they do not really represent, let's say, well, they're not in the opposition for sure, and they don't represent a political party as in the opposition. What would you say to that?
Well, like I say, it would be a neutral position. Remember that you would be called upon to investigate what went on, and it would not be you investigating what went on in your party or your government. So I'm saying that it would be a neutral position, and then you would be free to be guided. Then, if anything, you will have the deputy, and should not be a conflict of interest for certain.
And a question about something that you did not bring up. When you have forums such as this, where citizens are able to speak directly to public bodies, do you think that Parliament should have some sort of access point for citizens to be able to come before maybe committees of Parliament to be able to speak freely?
Well, I would welcome that.
And why would you welcome it?
Because we all should have a say.
Okay.
We all should have a say. That's democracy at work.
Thank you. Senator Thompson, you wanted to raise it.
In the interest of time, I'm going to be very brief, Mr. Highland. I'm deeply attracted to your suggestion. My only concern was, suppose the independent senator just doesn't have the appetite to do the political investigation, because normally it is the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee that would initiate the investigation. Suppose the independent senator who is chairing just doesn't have the appetite for the work.
Well,
but I do take your point about the potential conflict of interest and avoiding that and so on. I'm just trying to get you to develop it so that I can think it through, but it is an interesting suggestion.
Yeah, well, I must say that even the leader of the opposition, sometimes it is seemed that they don't have the appetite either. But I must say that if the leader of the opposition is given the appropriate staff, just how the leader of the opposition will have staff, they can have staff that can do the work, and you can get the necessary support that he would need. So I wouldn't run away from it just thinking that you might not have the appetite. As a matter of fact, I think the more work you give him, the more he might want to take it on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Okay, and we have in this order Mr. Bascom, Mr. Hunt, and then Ms. Dujon.
Good night to all. Good night to the chairman, and good night to my fellow comrades. I have just one suggestion.
Okay, just a minute. I will allow him to because we're getting a little noisy. I know we might be enjoying or getting animated, but we want to hear the speakers and the, you know.
Okay. My name is Mr. Adrian Bascom, St. Michael, South Central. I just have one suggestion for the committee, since we are talking about reform. Now, I would think that reform also in Parliament would have, and I would like to see that have a more inclusivity of citizens alike having their say, as we have here in reform, but we have a wider spectrum that don't normally have this say. In fact, one would think, or one would suggest that when you have the parish speaks and other forums that people are allowed to speak, it would seem that particular questions are pre-put or put there for them to answer, not what they really want to ask the committee. And I would like to see a more freedom of speech, because that's what our leader, the Right Excellent Earl Walter created for all of us. That is true democracy. Freedom of speech, freedom to express. And you heard it, you heard him put over eloquently in his mirror image speech, which is one of the best speeches that Mr. Earl Walton have ever made. He made many great speeches, but that one took the cake. My suggestion I would like to see happening is that the Senate should be elected by ballot and appointed. That's it. That's my main suggestion, because I think it will bring more balance and more fairness in both the Senate and the House. That's my suggestion.
Let me say, I understand. You're saying that the Senate should be elected by ballot and then appointed?
That's correct.
And not appointed, because right
No,
now...
not appointed, not appointed.
Oh, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good night. Dr. Cheltenham, welcome to Georgia. And Ms. Thompson as well. I just want to say one thing.
Name, sir.
Oh, Reginald Hunt. I am not an archivist, neither am I a historian, but I'm a collector of information. And I have some concern that the preparation of Hansard has been very backward as far as Parliament is concerned. I have had the privilege of reading a number of the 1950, 56 to 61 Hansard, copies of Hansard. I can't even get a copy of the last 10 years of Hansard. I don't know what is the problem, but there seems to be a lack of preparation. And since we are speaking about governance, I wish that to be emphasized in the report, that there must be timely preparation of Hansard for persons who wish to do their research. I'm very concerned about that. As I said already, I'm going to repeat it. I don't know what is the problem, but if there's a problem, let us make sure, Mr. Chairman, we all report that that problem become not a problem anymore. Thank you. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much. And that contribution from a gentleman who I, as a former senator, would have, Senate colleague, would have loved to hear his interventions. He says he's not an archivist officially, but he is. And he's also what I would call a serious part of the institutional memory of the party of their loving people. Ms. Dujon? I'm sorry, Sir Richard wants to comment.
No, I just wanted Mr. Hunt to know that the fact that we don't have up-to-date answered report. In fact, there's a gap covering quite a few years, which is being worked on, because it is a concern of the Prime Minister. It is a concern of mine. There was a time when historians could always consult Hansard because they were up to date. I know that our clerk, Mr. Eastman, is aware of what is happening, and I don't know whether he wants to say anything about how far we have reached in correcting the omissions. Perhaps he doesn't want to speak, but I can assure you that serious efforts are being made to correct the omissions.
Thank you. Ms. Dujon?
Okay, I'm just going to hold it this way, if it's okay. Another unpopular topic would be in terms of gender quotas in parliamentary representation. We think quite a lot in terms of female or women's representation and how it affects the greater populace. I don't know how it will be established if we have to indoctrinate it or place it somewhere in our constitution to provide greater transparency for women, and of course the kind of platform and encouragement, and also in terms of promotion of women in elective politics. I think it's important that that kind of discussion they've had quite a lot of research. There's much research that has been done in terms of how it benefits the greater society, the greater number. If you look at our current parliamentary representative, we will see that and how it's reflective over the years, over the centuries. So I think it's important that if we are thinking of reform, we have to consider in terms of discriminations against women in elective and participatory politics. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just one comment, and I would ask what your thoughts are. Well, you can react to my comment. It's a personal position. I personally don't feel strongly about quotas one way or the other. What is important for me is an agenda, a policy and programmatic agenda that addresses issues that are important to women, and to all people, but they're important to women, because you may have significant representation, but a policy and programmatic agenda that does not speak to the issues. And so for me, numbers are fine, but those numbers have to translate into a sensibility and sensitivity to issues that are important, because we can play the numbers game, we can argue about it, but when you line up the accomplishments and the impacts that those accomplishment policy and programs have on women and children and on the population generally, and there's equity, you know, gender equity and so on. So I have heard it, and I hear a lot of people making pronouncements about it.
Right.
But for me, there must be some outcomes once we have those quotas. But the other problem is when you start to speak quotas, how do we account for all these several interest groups? But that's something we can get into. I leave that to the younger ones here to speak to, perhaps.
And I think it's an important conversation that we ought to have. It's not only about dealing with the numbers, but also in terms of how does political parties designate who the potential candidates will be, how funding will be designated, because that's important, in terms of the constituency that those female candidates. I think it's an important conversation. Why? I did say it would be an unpopular conversation. But I think if women, the reality is that we, particularly the younger generation, I'm not that young, but the younger generation having to deal with not being able to give the kind of support that is needed. Not only in terms of physical, but also financial support is very important, where you find some male candidates can be funded as opposed to female candidate. And I think that has been a discussion that we ought to have. The older generation may not necessarily see it as something that is important, but of course we can understand there are different kinds of situations that female candidates have to endure, not only in terms of the various types of stereotypes about women and why they should not be on a platform. You should be home cooking and not on a platform. So,
Continue. Continue.
So I think that's the kind of conversation that is very much needed. And it's not to say, and I do understand where you're coming from in terms of the numbers, and that we're just going to place women there as placeholders, which is irrelevant to that point. But ensuring that there are mechanisms that women, when they do come into the place, I would say the unwelcoming environment, that there is a support unit for them, that women do not feel intimidated. So it's always good when we see leaders like yourself that have made the way. And we're here talking about parliamentary reform, and there's only 2 women here right now. And so that only 2 feet at the table.
Continue.
And this is exactly why the reason why we
ignore the aside.
right. So that this is exactly what we want to look at, and not just look at it as the numbers, but in terms of the representation and what it means to represent a majority of the group of the populace. If they're not seeing that being represented in their own, political background and in political spaces, then it's very important, because then we would not have to be explaining ourselves to our male colleague that we don't have to do those things. So I think it's an important conversation that needs to be open, and if we are looking to reform anything, we have to think about those that are less represented in politics.
I think Sir Roy wants to raise or to make a comment in relation to your contribution. Sarah, you have to.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you made a reference to representation of women, but I wanted to ask you to go a bit beyond that, particularly since you heard Ms. McLean's response, needing to have a program that works, an agenda that works, rather than settling yourself on sheer numbers. But when you've gone to look at interest groups, have you given thought, and the party given thought, to other interest groups that the party may be thinking of, that you may be thinking of, including the young people, your young Democrats or young people in your constituencies? Or have you been given thought as well to those among you who might be disabled in one form or another? Have you looked at that, and have you got any thoughts for the Commission regarding what you would like to see us or hear us talking about in preparing a report on those interest groups?
Well, I think I like the way that you lumped everything together, disability, gender, and everything else, all the misrepresented groups. But of course, with the Democratic Labour Party, we have our young Democratic president here, and again, it's to provide the support that is required. And if we're talking about disability, it does not immune gender either, because if we're talking about youth, it does not discriminate against gender either. And so for us to look at those kinds of issues, I think it's important for us to look at in terms of what is the role of female representatives as opposed to male. And it's not that, as I said before, it's not as a placeholder, but what are the issues that should have been addressed or can be addressed by both genders or whatever genders, whether it's male or female, but you're representative. And so if we're even going to talk about gender representative, I'm not only talking about females, because now we know that gender is so fluid. We could talk about all genders. But the reality is that to give persons that capability so that they can feel that they have their opportunities, which is very important to speak on those issues, because issues that may affect us as women may not necessarily affect you, sir, or my colleague here. So the reality is that there are certain issues that I believe that is very permanent that we need to speak about, and I think representation is paramount. And I would not want to put it in terms of not just gender, but even if race. We talk about race all the time. If you don't see something that represents your identity, then what does that say? We're seeing legislation sometimes are being created that does not include the gender identity and the concerns that affect gender. And I think it's important that we look at that and don't just lump everything together and assume that there are other groups within that society that are disadvantaged, so we should all lump everything. Gender discussions are quite different from a discussion to deal with disability or discussion that deals with youth. And so we have to ensure that we prioritize things that are important so that gender covers all of those areas that you covered, sir. And so that once we identify what would be some of the key areas, and Comrade, I don't want to dismiss what you're saying in terms of the numbers, but I believe that if we have very clear plans as to what gender representation in Parliament looks like, then we will be able to put those various types of policies in so that political parties will be able to identify, so we don't have political leaders that decide, okay, we're going to just run male candidates because, you know, they're more sexy looking. You know, things of that nature, or because the electorate may vote a male candidate as opposed to a female candidate. I think the conversation is needed because if we are going to promote gender equality and equity, I think those are the kinds of conversations that we ought to have, and don't dismiss it because it seems to be just a placement as opposed to the real issues, because female identity is very important when we speak about elective and parliamentary representative.
Thanks. Dr. Chandler wants to.
Mr. John, in relation to this question about gender quotas, you know, we live in an age for a good set of decades now where we're trying to eliminate discrimination. And you as a lecturer in philosophy know you know that there is negative discrimination and positive discrimination. And in this case, if we have a quota in favor of women, it would be positive discrimination, which could happen. I mean, it could happen. Now, how do you respond to those people who say we should not have any form of discrimination, even if it is in a positive direction? And then the other thing that I'm asking is, there's a former leader of this party who said he can't legislate morality. So should we be placing in law strictures that would change culture, or should we be changing culture organically?
It's nice meeting you in person. I think you asked two questions. You asked a question about morality, and I think when you ask the question of morality, it always asks what morality you're talking about, because there are different types of morality. There's the ontological morality, and there's the teleological morality. So it all depends on what morality you're discussing and how we try to incorporate it. And I think that's where the problem starts, when we have a dominant thought of what morality should be. So that's one aspect. So if you want to take a utilitarian, or you want to take Aristotle or Platonic kind of morality, then you deal with that. So morality primarily has to look at it in terms of how the society would look at that. Now, the other issue that you raise in terms of discrimination, yes, we can look at positive and negative discrimination in itself, but the reality is that that form of discrimination has been happening for centuries, because we still have our friend here who believes that I should be at home cooking right now in the 21st century, and that has continued to perpetuate even while we're having those discussions to this day. So I think it's if we have the discussions early, it will not allow our descendants to have that conversation again. If we put in the mechanisms there early, then persons will know, okay, well, if we're looking for candidates, we're not only just going to pick a female. I mean, that female could be a horrible female, and we've seen that. But the reality is that we want to ensure, that when we have those kinds of situations, that political parties and the greater persons, which is the society as a whole, the representation is there, that women do not feel in any way intimidated to come into any political party and say, hey, I need to be a female candidate, and what are the provisions, what are the mechanisms, what are the support, and how do you promote female identity within politics? And I think that is important, because if not, we're going to be here in the next 50 years having that same kind of conversation, and I think it's important that we do that now. Thank you.
So Richard, you wanted to
say that an important question has been raised, an important issue. And seems to me that there are two approaches to increasing female participation in the electoral process. You can either legislate it, as some countries have done, or alternatively, you can encourage the political parties to seek to recruit more female candidates. In terms of those two approaches, which one do you favor?
Well, as a philosopher, I would not choose on that. I would see what the two... Well, I think most of the first thing that you'd want to do is to do some research on what would be the best approaches to it. See what other countries have done and how has it worked for them, and how it can benefit us in some aspects. So both approaches, because you can't really mandate a political party as to who the candidates can be. But if it's law, then it almost kind of pressures them to do what is right in some cases. So I think we need to look at what the models have looked at, what have been done, those countries that legislated it, what are the effects that it has had over the years, and if it has actually improved the smooth transitions of women into politics. So
right
I think
now we have more women participating in public life and in the House of Assembly than we've ever had.
Correct.
Yet, I'm forgetting what is the percentage of women now in the
26%. 26%.
26%. So we're still short.
Very short.
Of what it should be.
90% from the secretary, so be short.
But I just wondered which of the two approaches you preferred, that the political party should be encouraged to recruit more women as candidates, or that we should go directly to some sort of legislation whereby they have to satisfy the law by actually recruiting more women as candidates.
Yeah, I think you should legislate it. And because once you do that, then regardless of who's running the political party, what century they're in, as long as the law is there, then chances are they would have to. So I think legislation would work in that aspect if you think about it this way. But how the law will have to be drafted is very important as well if you're going to legislate it. You can't just tell a political party, well, we need 10 women, and they just, pick up their friends somewhere and just put them in. So it has to be in a way that it has to be done. It has to be done in such a way that it covers and captures what we mean, and is very much the same conversation that we've had in terms of the codes of ethics and why. Because we still want, even though we're speaking about gender, we still want good human beings with good character, persons with integrity and accountability. So all of that is necessary, but we're just saying that we just need at least a good set of numbers to represent all of society.
Okay, thank you very much. And before I go to the next two speakers, which would who would be Errol Hurley and John Boyce, I just want to acknowledge the 120 persons who have been with us online for most of the night because they themselves may offer comments sometimes and raise questions. And after, there's another hand at the back. No. Errol? Can somebody pass the mic to Errol, please?
I want to say to the committee and everyone that is here, the disabled fraternity in Barbados is very dear to my heart because I am blind. And I believe, and it's something that I've been discussing among some of my peers, that I believe that part of the parliamentary legislation is that there should be some sort of provision for a person with disability to be able to enter active politics and become a parliamentarian. Now, it is very important because you have discussions in Parliament about disability, but there's nobody in there to actually represent the disabled. And I think that we should put it in the parliamentary legislation, how they're discussing how many females they want in Parliament. We want to know how much members from the disabled can come into Parliament too. And we in the disabled community can make a great contribution to this country just as normal people and females. I just want to say that we follow the disabled community, follow politics very serious, especially me. And Mr. Chairman, Dr. Cheltenham, I'm putting this proposal to you and your committee that you all look at making a provision for a person with disability in Parliament. I know they had some in the Senate, right. Senator Eiffel and the other gentleman there from Bank Hall, Linton.
Senator Linton.
Senator Linton. But we want it now inside the Parliament. We want that. And give us the chance to prove our capabilities in this country as a person with disability. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And given the time, my former cabinet colleague and Minister John Boyce will have the last word. What I would do as he takes the microphone is to invite anyone who had or who has any contributions to make. We certainly will welcome them in writing. So over to you, Mr. Boyce.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Commission for allowing the members of the Democratic Labour Party to participate in this consultation. I think it was very interesting. I listened to the contributions. As usual, the question is always, what do we replace these systems with? And all the suggestions that have been made, and Art is, of course, an expert at suggestions, but the question is always, how do we implement these changes? I'm happy, sir, that you as chairman was able to refer back to the days of the district councils. I remember as a schoolboy in St. Peter having to deal with the issues of the Northern District Council, and I believe there was the Southern and there was the Central. And the question, as you rightly pointed out, and some of your commissioners shared, is about efficiency and how we do our business. Because we got away from the issue of local government because it was inefficient and because it wasn't delivering. And we moved to central government. We have recently seen, in I think it's 2019, that the leader of government business in the House moved an amendment where, during the debate of the estimates, the different ministries whose heads were being discussed were allowed to bring personnel into the well of Parliament and answer questions about the disbursement of funds and the way that development and repairs would occur. Subsequent to that, of course, the political party in government today has chosen to have what they refer to as constituency speaking or constituency speaks. And the truth is that there's very little difference in my estimate to what I see going on at the constituency speak sessions as to what goes on in Parliament when we are discussing the estimates and the ministries that are, the issues are being, the heads are being debated are represented. The question is therefore, again, the efficiency with which we are delivering, and that is not really Parliament's business, truth be told. It is about the discipline of the government of the day and making sure that the public service is tooled to deliver on the kind of wishes which the Parliament may from time to time, want to be delivered. The question, of course, of the supremacy of cabinet, again, I think it is Art who raised that question. The issues of cabinet are not cabinet made. The issues of cabinet evolve through ministries, evolve through ideas in constituencies, and they come through the relevant ministries then to go to cabinet for consideration, and the papers are presented, then they're brought to Parliament and considered. The issue of interest groups, Mr. Chairman, may be looked at by way of having special occasions on which, if we don't see the room for expanding Parliament or changing too much at this time, having occasions on which interest groups can have special days to come to Parliament and make presentations, and members of Parliament are obliged to attend. And these can be handled through the standing orders of Parliament, because you don't set Parliament tasks without giving them standing orders. And I've heard no one refer to the standing orders of Parliament, and that is really where Parliament can change its emphasis. It can allow Parliament to, the standing orders can be changed so as to give Parliament strength in areas where there has not been strength before. It can, as I said, it happened with the consideration of the estimates. The question of apathy can also be partly dealt with, I suggest, in this way, by having occasions for young people to have a day when they can make their presentations to Parliament. And Parliament, again, through the standing orders, can be made to listen to and consider the suggestions that are being made. To try to include everything within the ambit of 30 members of Parliament, or even 40 members of Parliament further, seems to me to be not necessarily getting to the root of the matter. We have to hear these interest groups, and if we can't do it with just change in Parliament, because the changes are obviously extensive, then we can start by having these special occasions on which interest groups are represented, and they come to Parliament, and Parliament is obliged, that's the point I want to make, to hear the issues that are being made. I want to say this too, and I really consider it seriously. It is not that if it ain't broke, you don't fix it, but it's that if it's working, why do we want to tinker with it to the extent that we destroy what is working? And my experience in looking around at other countries is that really, has there been any better system of government than the one that we practice here in Barbados? It's not an excuse I'm making, sir. It is just an observation I'm making about what's going on. We have an example in the United States now where the Speaker of the House, has just been elected by almost, after so many attempts, and yet there is total confusion as to whether the government of the United States can deliver on what it wants to deliver and what the people want it to deliver on because of certain policies which the certain groups within the Parliament of the United States want to have for themselves. So I am fearful, I'm cautious then, let me put it that way, not fearful, I'm cautious about unnecessary tinkering with a system that has worked well. Now that is the point we have to admit to. Well, yes, but we can certainly look to improvements, and I think I made a couple of suggestions about where improvements could come about. So I think that, yes, we are serving a very important purpose in considering the question of Parliament. The fact is, and I think the President made the point when he made the presentation, there's a lot of overlap, though, between what we want to consider for this commission and the commission which you, Mr. Chairman, had to point out is not within your authority to report on. You see, because the people, when you get to the people's contribution, it comes down more to the Constitution than to Parliament. When it comes to Parliament, I think the standing orders of Parliament and that can be dealt with within that system to strengthen or to vary or to widen the considerations of Parliament without necessarily making the absolute changes. So apathy must be addressed, interest groups must be addressed. The question of the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, Madam Commissioner, I want to suggest that it's nothing about his appetite or her appetite. It's about the report of the Auditor General, which has to be considered. So it's nothing about whether the chairman has an appetite to discuss it or not. It is whether we are going to discuss the report of the Auditor General, who would have pointed out things that he thinks the people of Barbados need to be reported to about. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Okay, very quickly, because we need to wrap up. We're here from 6:30, so.
Yes, thank you. You see, the standing orders basically govern how the House operates. And yes, Parliament can make adjustments, but that's exactly what we don't want to leave to chance. We are saying, look, changes have to be made. If we are going to reform Parliament, let's reform it. So it isn't the choice of the cabinet or the members that you elect, but it's mandatory. It has to be done. It's simple as that.
Whatever you want. Thank you very much. And on that note, now I invite Sir Roy to share his closing remarks, and that will be followed by a vote of thanks by Commissioner Thompson. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Comrade McLean. I think my task has been made so very simple and easy because John, my brother John, summarized everything that we were talking about. He raised the issues that we wanted raised. Some issues which were not touched on, he deliberately put on the table so that even though they were not expanded on earlier, he is reminding us that as we meet with others and sit down to put together a report, that we should bear in mind a number of very critical factors, those that you have raised here and those which have not been raised because in his view they have been working, and he said they've been working well enough that he is not urging you to look for a reason to change them. My understanding is that he's not saying that they can't be changed, but that he's saying that until you can find something better, don't hurry to change it because we heard some time ago that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that makes a lot of sense. But that there are a number of things which you yourselves have raised and for which I would wish on behalf of the Commission to thank you for the thought that you have given to it. Some of those things we have to keep thinking about more fully. And Mr. Pisa, her thoughts, which we would want to think about some more, are obviously thoughts which have been exercising our minds because we have heard other presentations that have been made to us. And clearly the need for us to recognize that there are numbers of people who have interests that they want to have expressed, but who feel that in the past they have not had the opportunity to express themselves or to feel that they are part of the decision-making process. We have ourselves been looking at that, and that is one of the reasons why you would find that some of our questions in our discussions with you have been to hear from you how you think we can enrich this exercise of participation beyond participation only by people in the House of Assembly or people in the Senate. And I think that you have in several different ways given us food for thought, given us reason to think some more about what it is that we would want or you would want to see us putting together. And I don't want to gild the lily because, as I said, John has summarized quite nicely. I wish merely to repeat that we have been pleased that you've given us the opportunity to look at the questions of the levels of representation that there are, and that you, like us, you have been looking at the question of the extent to which citizens have devised or are able to devise means by which the citizenry of Barbados is better able to take part in what goes on in the development process for our country. We will keep thinking of what you have said tonight, and as we put our thoughts together, we will bear in mind, with thanks and appreciation, the thoughts that you have expressed. Beyond that, I don't want to speak any longer, because, Chairperson, I think you have somebody to thank for, on our behalf, to thank the audience who were here. And so, unless you yourself are doing it.
No, I indicated Ambassador Thompson.
Okay, so I will go straight to Ambassador Thompson. And I personally would wish to thank you for receiving me back home at your house for
For some of us, we are not coming back home. But we are deeply grateful to have been so warmly welcomed into the house that Errol Barrow built. Thank you indeed for your kind welcome, for the keenness of the participation, for the fact that these are important national issues which together as a people, not as two political parties on different sides of the political divide, but as Barbadians who want what is best for our country and want to build the strongest and best possible democracy for our children and grandchildren to inherit. And from that perspective, the Commission is grateful for your interest, for all of you being present here in person tonight. The room is absolutely full. I hope that is clear to those online. For the 122 people, we started the night with 30 online. We've grown to 122. So thank you to all the persons online who attended and stayed with us. I would wish to thank in particular your leadership, members of your executive, former members of cabinet, members of your rank and file, and various representative bodies of the party. We take it that what you have shared with us represents the wider view of the party. I would wish to remind that we have sent a list, I believe, of 35 questions, which we want to have answers to in writing, and I want to assure you that we are asking the other major political party to give us the exact, they have the exact same questions. They receive them at the same time as you did, so that they too can answer. And I imagine that at some point the answers to these questions will become a matter of public interest, because it really does represent the vision of the two major and great political parties of our country for their vision for going forward. Let me thank Oversight, our technical team, for their excellent work as usual. To Bonnie Leonce for the interpretation for the hearing impaired. She's been at the back of the room working all night. I don't know if everybody recognized that she was present. You see that we have a full turnout of the Commission, so you know that on our side there was keen interest. We look forward to taking your suggestions forward in a format that will constitute recommendations to the government, and indeed seeing what the government does with them once we make the recommendations. Deadline? Okay. So Richard is suggesting that I give you a deadline for submission, and you will appreciate, of course, that the later the responses come to us, the more difficult it is for us to do our work within our own parameters and deadline, and for us to fairly represent the quality of the material that comes to you. So we are urging that as soon as possible, while giving it careful thought. We are not asking you to rush through your process, but we are asking you to be mindful of our own and to let us have your written submission. So thank you so very much, and blessings on you and your house.